First off, let me say this video will be spoiler free for the most part. You should still probably watch Endgame before you see this, and avoid watching it if you want to know absolutely nothing about Endgame, which is probably the best way to see the movie. Now, Avengers Endgame is not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. It has some rather noticeable flaws, most of its own creation, and in my opinion it makes Infinity War's biggest problem much worse. But it is the perfect event movie. A couple years ago, when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I texted a friend and explained that it was the first movie that felt like an issue of a comic book. I can now say Avengers Endgame is the first film that feels like a comic book event. I didn't feel this way when Captain America and his friends thrashed a dull-looking airport. I didn't feel that way when the Avengers first assembled. And I didn't even feel that way during Avengers, the one where they all lose to a guy with the most moronic plan of all time. But this movie finally did it. Even more so than Infinity War, Endgame doesn't care about if you're caught up. It doesn't bother explaining character dynamics or who these people are in the slightest. It has the attitude of, you have better watched all of the previous films and their after credits to have any clue what's going on, and when I say that, I truly mean all of them. Even beyond the obvious fact that it's a sequel, it is chock full of callbacks and references to the earlier films in the MCU, and has quite a few blatant fan service moments. But for once, they all feel earned. If not this movie, which is the culmination of the most ambitious cinematic venture of all time, then what movie ever has earned the right to be self-referential? When the first Avengers film came out, I was in 8th grade. It was a bizarre experience for me. As someone who had been a comic fan my whole life, seeing a warm-up in my Spanish class being who is your favorite Avenger and why, and listening to almost every kid in that class have an answer and an explanation was surreal. Now here we are, in a world where theaters are cheering for Rocket Raccoon and Ant-Man. Endgame is more than just a film. It's the closing of a chapter of something that has been a constant in people's lives for over a decade. Unlike its predecessor, which focused on the big dumb purple man, Endgame is a movie about heroes. The heroes so many of us have grown up with. The heroes that manage to get old people to laugh along with a CGI gun-toting raccoon and cry when a sentient tree who can only say one thing died. Even more than films like Return of the Jedi or Return of the King or Harry Potter and the Cash Grab That Started a Trend Part 2, this film is more than a film. It's the end to one of the most successful runs in cinema history. It's the end of the journey that was embarked upon over a decade ago. It can only exist because of its parts, yet it becomes greater than the sum of them. Now obviously the MCU will exist as long as it makes money, and hopefully in 10 years from now I'll be going to see a film where the X-Men, Avengers, Fantastic Four, and Guardians all team up in order to stop Galactus, but this film is written as a conclusion to every MCU film that has come before. This isn't the perfect movie, but it's the perfect love letter and goodbye to the most unique cinematic experiment of all time. It's more than just a movie. It's a heartfelt goodbye, but more importantly a celebration of all that came before. A celebration of the franchise that started with one man in a cave making a suit of armor, riding off of a unique gamble made by Marvel to even get the film made. It's the closing to character arcs that have been ongoing for a decade. Avengers Endgame can be nitpicked to death, sure, but to do so would be to miss the point. Now, I'm not saying the movie should be immune to criticism or that you can't criticize it. It's still a movie after all. But don't ignore the fact that it's an event all on its own. Avengers Endgame is a movie that would have been impossible to make under any other circumstances. Avengers Endgame is the perfect conclusion and a unique event that may very well never happen again in cinema. Enjoy it while you can. Now's that part where I'm supposed to ask you to subscribe, so do that if you want, I suppose. I post videos rarely, with no real schedule, and on whatever crosses my mind.